Let me picture you a scene. It's the 64th minute in an Arsenal pre-season friendly against the MLS All-Stars. It's 2:30 in the morning, but you've just been brought out of your liminal slumber by the first sight of Mr. Jurrien Timber taking his first steps onto the pitch as an Arsenal player. From then, it really didn't take long for him to become one of my favourite Arsenal players. And look, I'm not here to lose you on the Jurrien Timber hype train. I'm here to tell you why, from the moment he was signed, I was so stoic on the fact that he was a vital pillar in how Arteta wants to evolve this Arsenal team progressing forwards. Welcome back to the Harvey Gratian YouTube channel. I'm so glad you've found us or are joining us once again. And similar to my first video, when we signed the Dutch international, I'm going to profile Jurrien Timber before going through sort of the litany of options of where he fits this Arsenal team and why in the future. This is a Jurrien Timber deep dive. Let's get on with it. So this season's left-back role for Arsenal, it felt designed, I think, for Jurrien Timber so much. We all know the Dutch international is hugely versatile, and in pre-season this was exemplified. He made his debut against the MLS All-Stars as that inverting right-back, as he did against Manchester United, before featuring as a left-back against Barcelona, who formed sort of part of a 2-3 build-up shape on the left-hand side of Partey and Ben White, and then became more of a nominal left-back in the Community Shield against Manchester City. But this all changed once again against Nottingham Forest on the opening day of the Premier League season, where he tucked in from left-back to play that conservative outside left centre-back role in a back three as Partey inverted this time from right-back. Yet the left-back role has evolved over the season for Arsenal, and the best signifier of this is how Takehiro Tomiyasu has been used. Starting wide in Arsenal's 4-2-4 initial deep build-up, then in the second and third phases, Tomiyasu then has the freedom to either move into a midfield 2 or even a 3, depending on whether Ødegaard and Rice, or even both, drop alongside Partey 2. But then also Tomiyasu can occupy the left-hand 8 position between the lines, and in these positions Tomiyasu can link play, can under or overlap, and even hold the width. And this role for Tomiyasu was also mapped onto the right hand side against Wolves, but in general he's played this freer left back role that is allowed really to just roam across the pitch, unlike when Kivior has played it, for example, who's been protected a bit wider, I think, and then Zinchenko, who because of sort of his qualities in the build up makes our shape a bit more rigid everywhere else. But this meandering left back berth is also dependent on the player's own interpretation of it, and Timber is someone who adds a real level of detail, a new level of detail into these spaces. So what does Timber's profile add? Well, he's effectively a plug and play, or that's the hope when he eventually gets sharp enough to play consistent minutes, obviously looking like that's next season now. But he takes Zinchenko's technical security and broadly Tomiyasu's ability as sort of a defensive locker and rolls them into one. And even though we're talking about sort of this roaming left-back role, these qualities being described can just be mapped onto the right-hand side so easily. I mean, of course, Ben White himself has been part of this evolving right-hand side dynamic for Arsenal, one which now is very reliant on his dynamism to provide a runner on that right-hand side, moving high when Ødegaard moves deeper and away from Saka's zone and allows Saka in field. But we've also seen, for a period of time, Ben White invert from right-back into midfield. And I think you can see how transferable all of these adaptable assets are onto Jurrien Timber. And it's interesting that when you look at Ben White, for example, his inversions against West Ham United, this was the role I had initially in mind for Jurrien Timber when he joined, and one that there's still, of course, a very good chance of him taking up. But this doesn't necessarily, if he does play this role, this definitely doesn't signal the end of Ben White, because as we've seen in the early season when Gabriel was dropped, there's a whole shift across when we invert from right back. There's a whole shift across of our whole backline dynamics. I would say the only defender who's really nailed in this Arsenal team is Saliba, and I'm including Timber himself in this. He's by no means nailed. But ultimately, I think what we get in possession from Jurrien Timber is complete versatility, and this in-possession profiling is what I'm going to focus on right now. For example, in the pivot, Jurrien has a level of understanding for space that I think it makes him a constant option. There's loads of movements, and I think this emphasises that at heart, although he can be fixed, Timber is a roamer at nature. It's why the above left-back role that I've just described fits him so well. He's really, as well, one of the most press-resistant players around. He's composed under pressure, he's low to the ground, which gives him an extremely fluid turning circle, and you'll often see him sort of turning out of tight spaces and carrying his team up the pitch, and I think this addition of central carrying is vital for us in a team where Smith Rowe and Jesus haven't had the levels of usage we really may have expected, and Rice's sort of more obvious progression via carrying has more probably tantalised us than inundated us. But this isn't Timber's only progressive option, that's what I want to stress. He's one of Europe's best progressors in the build-up, and this is where you really see the idea of the Zinchenko upgrade or replacement when you combine his defensive upside on this as well. But like the Ukrainian, Timber is a proper tempo setter from deep, and he has a lovely balance between security and progression. This sort of dichotomy is something we always bring up on the channel. But Timber is also extremely effective between the lines, and in these higher areas, his reception of the ball translates from his press resistance, but it's exciting how much he's going to be allowed to move higher up. And we'll often see him as a sixth man in attack, or even being the furthest forward, probably making sort of second striker runs. Of course, the knock-on effect that we get from this is more productivity out of Martinelli, which is something that we all desire to see in this Arsenal team. And I think with the additions of Timber, and then with Rice and a new left centre mid, which of course would rotate with Timber in a similar way that Tomiyasu and Declan Rice do in possession now, there's going to be, I think, this blend of carrying but also incision, these dynamic interchanges and combinations that access Gabriel Martinelli in a new way. And part of the reason, I think, is just by virtue of having a more active presence or presences able to occupy the left 8 role, always probing as opposed to just filling a gap, which is what we've seen really when Kivior's taken up that freer left back role this season. I think Timber adds another touch heavy player to balance out Ødegaard's sort of heavy lifting on the right hand side. So in summary, of course he's able to cover those outside centre-back roles too, but Timber is a player who pretty much stabilises our box midfield, and assuming Partey leaves, which is by no means guaranteed, the image of Timber and Rice either side of each other at the base of the box, and sort of a left centre-mid recruit and Ødegaard, for example, ahead of them, not only ahead of them, but able to rotate with Timber and form as well that more flexy midfield 3 or even 3+1 as we've seen in recent weeks. Along with this bulletproofing out of possession, it's definitely a really nice option going into the future. And the out of possession side of Jurrien Timber's game is something that I will absolutely cover later. I mean, as I'm going to probably bore you with emphasising, I do not know exactly where Jurrien Timber is going to play next season, because Arteta himself has not finished his experimenting. This was cut short by Timber's absence in a way. And he's also going to be in the market for signings that is going to shed more light on sort of his grandmaster plan. But what it all boils down to, when I sum up Jurrien Timber, is not just his ability to tuck into a back three, invert deep or high, and do this on either side. I think he just epitomises this Arsenal team's move towards more sort of automatisms. And by this term, I mean the performance of actions without necessarily conscious thought. Things just seem to happen naturally on the pitch. And as I've analysed really in depth in my last video in relation to our build-up, Arsenal now are much more okay with player intuition and instincts being the leading proceedings on the pitch, with either 8 able in that pendulum system to drop deeper. And the same now goes for the fullbacks with Timber. There isn't necessarily a pigeonholing in one way of playing. In times gone by, of course, we've always seen we've been more vulnerable down one side or the other, normally the one we invert from, or we've had very set routes of progression, and that, by the way, is still very much in the works, with Ødegaard still sort of having a large proportion of our creations stemming from him. But these natural associations between players, it's very easy to strike up with Timber, as we're going to discuss, and this understanding of the flow of the game. But since pre-season, there has been a move away, I think, from everything being fixed at Arsenal. And I think this movement away is one we've only really seen come to fruition in the second half of the season. But for now, I want to take you through what we do know, not what we're hypothesising. And the roaming left-back berth given to Tomiyasu was the same one Jurrien Timber was deployed in for the under-21s against Blackburn, a game I'm going to take you through right now. Timber initially started wide in the 4-2-4 as a nominal left-back, but even here, there is such a level of nuance to how his role translates to the first team. There's sort of the fun option of him being able to start high and wide, making Martinelli the indirect target for a Havertz flick-on, or the deeper scheme, which involves interchanges with Declan Rice like we saw in the Community Shield. Rice dropped into left back or left centre back a lot, either pushing Jurrien higher or infield, or the other way around where Rice sat higher and unmarked from the City press. But there were also a lot of late movements and darts, if you will, from Rice into these types of positions whenever Timber was pressed by often Bernardo Silva. And this drew Rodri away from the centre, and then Timber could then drive inside and break this press. At the end of this sequence, I think we can see a semblance of the box midfield of what could have been this season. And I guess what I want to draw from all of this is that these rotations and natural interchanges, I think it shows you how relationships on the pitch are just as important as any set patterns on it. And we saw a very fluid and natural relationship too between Nwaneri and Timber in the Blackburn game. It's very similar to the current iteration, their relationship, of this Arsenal build-up we've been looking at recently, with Jurrien in the pivot in the second phase mostly, forming that 3-2 shape, with Nwaneri then dropping deeper in the third phase and Timber then moving higher between the lines. In these areas, whether high or low, there's so much, I think there's so many examples of what Timber brings to us. Outside of that super goal that he scored, of course, which won Arsenal Goal of the Month, there were combinations, movements to drag and draw, a threat in behind, switches of play from left to right wing, which we definitely need to see more. But I think after watching that Blackburn game, there was such a definable sense of what this freer role meant to Timber, because remember, this is what I'm stressing, there's a massive precedent now on him putting his own spin on it, and this is part of the greater freedom and shared responsibility Arteta is encouraging in Arsenal's in-possession stuff right now. But these levels of expression and also the dependence Arsenal place on these evolving fullback roles may just have to adapt once again. For this, I asked you to cast your mind back to 2 games earlier in the season. Well, one, even going into pre-season, and that's the MLS All-Stars, and then Nottingham Forest on the opening day of the season. Here we get, I think, an even larger sense of just how hard it is to predict where Timber's position in this Arsenal team is set, but I think that's a beautiful thing in itself. These 2 matches were much different to the normal, with Arsenal's settled in-possession structure, a more of a tilted box, or essentially, as we'll see against Nottingham Forest, a diamond. But let's start with the MLS All-Stars, which was Timber's debut. Inverting from right back initially into the base of midfield, Timber's movement here triggered Rice to move slightly higher, and Rice's role here is certainly one that did a lot more controlling than he currently does in the Arsenal team, and had a lot more touches, but largely speaking, he started deeper and then moved higher. Yet Timber himself had equal amounts of freedom in his role, promoting often to underlap in the half space, interchanging with Ødegaard who moved deeper, and I think this was a sign, in retrospect, of how things would develop in the actual season. And all in all, it created what I called then a lopsided box shape, and one that would become much more of an out-and-out diamond against Forest. And here, Timber and the team's roles were really different once again. Partey this time took up that Timber role of moving infield from right back this time, but was much more fixed in his positioning, unsurprisingly, and he became often a lone 6, with Rice and Ødegaard in the left and right centre mids either side of him. Timber instead became a more conservative outside left centre-back, as we've already mentioned, a sort of non-inverted development, which, out of all the pre-season experiments, Arteta was probably the most pleased with, because we saw Timber's comfort on the ball, aggressively positioning himself higher, often forming like a rest defence of sort of a 2-3. And this links to him and his presence as that outside left centre-back, not allowing Arsenal to lose any defensive solidity with his inclusion. But here's me, typically, still wanting a further level of variety and unpredictability to something that already seems enough. But that's Timber's occupation in this diamond of this left centre-mid or right centre-mid spot. I think this 3-diamond-3 structure is a much more tangible setup for the Pendulum 8 system enacted recently, but also one that comes with a lot more aggression and overloading, of course with the inclusion of the man at the tip of the diamond, which is most suited to Emil Smith-Rowe or Kai Havertz, and maybe as well Fabio Vieira. So it's probably a system that we'll most likely see against really deep blocks like Nottingham Forest were. But I think for Timber, he can be that connector between the lines in either of these centre mid positions. He can pivot high and low according to the other centre mid's movements and then shift Rice deeper. And this shift deeper into the 6 is still the position I see Declan Rice upholding the majority of his minutes in an Arsenal shirt with. But I said I would get onto it. Let's talk Timber's defensive profile, because I think this is where things get really interesting in terms of how things progress going into next season. We know Declan Rice has been key in his jumps when he's played there from left 8 this season, and it's often meant that the legginess, if you will, of Jorginho, and then much less often but still of Thomas Partey, have been put on view for all to see. But Timber essentially bulletproofs the outer possession setup and is able to press in this sort of left centre mid position too. He's built for these front-footed duelling moments. Why? Well, as I discussed earlier, he's built so low to the ground. He's got this really compact torso, without a better way of putting it, but also with really relatively long legs to his body, meaning that he can spring or snap into the tackle the same way a Declan Rice can, although he's not the same space eater, of course, as Declan Rice, and this is why he's much more to defending wide at fullback, where he's much more reliant then on his really good and athletic 5-yard burst than defending these massive spaces that we're going to task Saliba, Gabriel, Rice with, etc. But essentially, whether we play a 3-diamond-3 or not, there's a real possibility, I think, of Arteta tweaking this outer possession structure now that we have Timber included, and him jumping potentially in field. Rice then dropping back either in between the lines, as that sort of 6 normally does in our hybrid press, or even dropping us further back into the back line, similar to what John Stones does for Manchester City. I don't know whether this will happen, and it's just a possibility, but I think it is a real possibility of happening. And I think the only difficulty that I still haven't been able to get my head around is the positioning of Ødegaard in this sort of different setup, which is a discussion in itself entirely. Sort of, can you survive with Ødegaard defending in the pivot, or does he have to lead the press? Because certainly in the 3-diamond-3 setup, the man at the tip of the diamond is the one that is going to join the centre forward in our sort of 4-4-2 man-to-man press that we play now. But I think, in summary, there are roles that Timber is going to undoubtedly assume next season. But in terms of a whole overarching idea for Arteta, that's going to be seen later down the line. This applies for the whole team, but I think Timber just exemplifies this. I think to finish, a massive part of what makes him such a special player that we've completely evicted from the analysis so far is his mental profile, an intangible that is well worth touching on, as Arteta and Edu always stress, I think, that it's the human being first, and this dictates, I think, whether a player cuts it in their project or not. In Jurrien Timber, we don't just, I think, have a really incredible worker, but we have a very good human being, and it doesn't take much to look at his role with the academy players at Ajax and how everyone has taken to him at Arsenal to just know that. But that is my deep dive on Jurrien Timber. I really, really hope you've enjoyed it and you've at least taken something from it, looking at where we might see Timber in an Arsenal shirt next season, whether it's right, left, high or low, middle or wide. He could literally pick up any position. I think that's part of what makes him so special. But that is all from me. I really hope you've enjoyed it. I only ask you to like, comment, subscribe right at the end of the video, because hopefully you've enjoyed it, that means. But that is all from me. I'll catch you in the next one. See you later.